Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. I'm so wonderful guest, and it's my honor to have him on the show tonight. And these are his. I want to show you his books. He's got Dark Bio, Italian Louisiana, which he sent me a copy of. Echoes of Valor. Yes, and his latest book, BloodStained Louisiana. Now, I'm asked Alan to come back. We'll do another show on BloodStained Louisiana. But with that, guys and viewers and everybody that's with us tonight, let's welcome Alan to the show. Alan G. Gauthreaux, correct? Yay!
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Hey, Alan, before we start, will you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, please?
Oh, certainly. My name is Alan Gauthreaux, as our lovely host told you. I am from Louisiana. I live about 7 miles outside of New Orleans in Kenner, Louisiana. I am an educator first and foremost, historian, and an author. I wanted to be a military historian, but I kind of fell into true crime because I noticed that everybody has that dark part of their brain and they want to read about blood and guts and things of that nature, and also how crimes are committed in the minds of criminals. That's how I was introduced to Norene through a friend of mine who watches her show and said, hey, you'd be perfect for this. I don't know if I'd be perfect because the show isn't done yet, but we'll see.
Oh, absolutely. You've got quite a background, and I posted it. You can read more about Alan at the bottom of the video. It's there right now if you want to go in and read that. His books can also be found on Amazon.com. And Alan, do you have a website as well?
No, I do not have a website. I couldn't really afford a website, so I do a lot. I have pages on Facebook where I make announcements and do some live broadcasts there. Mostly do. Well, I have the true crime page over there that I do mini documentaries on true crime, and a couple of them from my book have been on there. But no, I don't have a website as of yet.
But you do have a YouTube channel.
Yes, I do have a YouTube channel. True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination, and I post videos up there as well.
Awesome. All right, so we all love true crime. My viewers love true crime, and I'm fascinated by the Axeman murders, and which I never knew. Alan told me, did you know that there was a woman as well? And I said, no, I didn't know. So Alan is going to talk about two of their Axemen from Louisiana or New Orleans.
Well, one of them actually was at work in New Orleans proper, and the other one was an Axewoman who actually came on the scene before the Axeman, and they're very interesting cases. One of them, the killer was actually caught, and the other one still at large, believe it or not.
All right. And can we start with the Axewoman?
We can start with the Axewoman.
This one's really fascinating.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It all started on February 11th, 1911, when the police had gone to a house in Crowley, Louisiana, which is in southwest Louisiana near Rayne and Lafayette. They opened the door to a house that belonged to a gentleman by the name of Walter Byers. His wife and young child were murdered in the home, and the police were quoted as saying that they had been brained with an axe. They didn't really think it was a serial killer. They thought it was just somebody that had gotten angry at the family. Well, 13 days later, on February 24th, 1911, near Lafayette, Louisiana, which is again in the southwest part of the state, Alexander Andrus and his wife, at the foot of the parents' bed. Police determined that the family was slaughtered by a party or parties unknown. Now, back then, there wasn't really the term serial killer. They just saw that the signatures were kind of alike. You know, they were killed with an axe. Axe is a weapon of opportunity. It's not really taken that somebody carries around an axe with them as a weapon. In March of 1911, Louis Castaway, his wife, and their 3 children were found dead in a family home near Beaumont, Texas, which is present day. If you go along the I-10, you'll hit Lafayette, Lake Charles, and then Beaumont. Now, the I-10 didn't exist back then, but Beaumont, Texas is in East Texas, near Houston. An older black man by the name of Raymond Barnabette was arrested for the Byers and the Andrus murders, as well as the Castaway murder. Now, all of the murder victims were black, but they also belonged, later on we find out that they belonged to a church, and I'll discuss that church a little bit later. On October 19th, 1911, Raymond Barnabette stood trial for the murders that he was accused of. And he was given a new trial because the evidence wasn't sufficient enough to convict him. In fact, his two children and his wife, well, his common-law wife was Nina Martin, and she gave evidence against him in court, along with his son, Zephyrin Barnabette, and his daughter, Clementine Barnabette. Now, even though he stood convicted of the charges, he was granted a new trial anyway. And when Raymond was incarcerated, another murder took place with the same signature as the other three. This time it was November 27th, 1911. Norbert Randall, his wife Azima, and their 4 young children were found mutilated in their beds. And authorities again found an axe leaning against the inside wall of the small house that they inhabited. Now, when they take into consideration, Norene, the murders in their totality, the police believed that there was more than one killer. And later when we find out that there was more than one killer. Later on, there was a murder on January 12th, 1912. Again, Raymond Barnabette was in jail. Felix Broussard and his wife and 3 children were axed to death on January 12th. And then on February 20th, 1912, in Beaumont, Texas, the Dove family of 5 was murdered. Now, what happens is the police do an investigation, and they start to realize that perhaps Zephyrin and Clementine aren't as innocent as they proclaim. There were more murders after Clementine's arrest, because then the police arrested her and her brother Zephyrin and accused them of the murders, and they steadfastly proclaimed, we're innocent. It was our father, Raymond Barnabette. Well, later on, in April of 1912, a gentleman by the name of William Barton and his family are slaughtered in San Antonio, Texas. And Zephyrin and Raymond confess to the murders. Well, that still leaves Clementine Barnabette. Clementine started to act crazy when they started to ask her about whether she had committed the murder. She started laughing hysterically, and come to find out that Clementine, this 17-year-old black girl, was the leader of a cult. And that cult was called the Circle of the Five, and they belonged to this church called the Church of Sacrifice, which believed that you could not atone for your sins unless you were actually killed for them in blood. And the bulk of the membership of this church were all black. So eventually, Clementine is acting crazy. So they get a couple of doctors from New Orleans, because New Orleans was a big city, had all the big people back then in 1912. And these doctors examine her and come to find out that she is not insane. She only acts insane. And then after this is adjudicated, Clementine confesses to the murders. Now, what's really strange about this, Norene, is that she confessed to the murders. Now when we watch TV and we discuss true crime stories, people confess to murders in the hopes of getting a lesser sentence. Well, she confesses to the murders, but they put her on trial for the murders anyway. And Clementine Barnabette is considered the first woman serial killer in Louisiana, and she's convicted. She goes to Angola Penitentiary, which is our penitentiary here, and before it was separated by men and women. She was convicted, and in 1916 she escapes. Oh. And they can't find her. And eventually she's found, and she is placed back in prison. And there was a law that was passed in 1902 in Louisiana called Article 160, which means that if you serve a certain amount of time in prison under a sentence of death or life, you are released after you serve a certain amount of good time. And in 1923, she's eventually released, and history loses track of her. But there was a website that popped up that I found that this woman was actually sitting in 1985, a young black girl, as we know them in Louisiana, passe blanc. They can pass for white because they're light skinned. And the picture that I don't know if you showed the picture of Clementine Barnabette.
Oh yeah, I did.
It's a little dark. But,
I got another picture of her. I have another image of her that I got.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this young woman in 1985 had posted on a blog about 10 years later, because 85 the internet was just starting, that she had sat and spoke with a woman, an older black woman who had appeared to be in her 90s or so, and she was talking to her, and she told her this story about Clementine Barnabette and the axe murders, and then later on the woman, the older black woman, had passed away. Well, the young woman had come to her funeral and asked to see a picture of her when she was younger, and showed her a picture of the axe murderess, Clementine Barnabette. But there's a twist to this story. The young woman who was talking to the older Clementine Barnabette, found out that Clementine was her grandmother. So, we kind of lost her to history up until then. I don't know how true the story was, but Clementine Barnabette was the first axe murderess serial killer in Louisiana.
We have a question already from a viewer. Nanny Tristan, she wants to know, where was she found after she escaped?
She was found in her hometown of Crowley, Louisiana. And there was a big hullabaloo in the black community because they were panicking again because, oh my God, the axe murderers got loose. So they found her in Crowley. She was actually identified, turned in by one of the old members of her church.
Interesting. Now, I would really like you to talk about, did you mention that her and her father were the leaders of an occult, no, it was Voodoo. It was Voodoo.
Yeah, it was Voodoo.
And
go ahead.
No, and then talk about this church that they belonged to.
Well, the church that they belonged to was called the Church of the Sacrifice, and it's kind of like, you get these cult leaders, and I mentioned that in my book. You have David Koresh, Charlie Manson, from what I understand, is on his deathbed now. We heard this morning. But you have these cult leaders that take this mystical type of attitude toward religion, and they start actually interpreting the Bible in sort of an evil way, and that's what happened with Raymond Barnabette and Clementine Barnabette. They interpreted the Bible in an evil way, where you start seeing the words blood in the Bible. Oh, well, I have to kill someone to make sure that they become redeemed. That's a way of redemption. She was very much into voodoo. Now, we could have a whole nother show on voodoo. Voodoo was a mixture of religions, has been in existence for over 8,000 years now, that had come over from Africa with the slaves in the 17th century, the Atlantic slave trade. Well, she believed, when she organized this gang, and there was a couple of other members of the gang that she had actually recruited, a guy by the name of U.T.E. Thomas, and he professed in Clementine's trial that she had made these bags from her voodoo knowledge that protected her and the members of her gang from being exposed as the murderers. So it was not only a deeply religious feeling, but it was also kind of a hoodoo or voodoo type of practice that she used to protect her and the other murderers from being detected.
So what was the purpose of her church? What was the purpose
of her church was actually, think about it. She's 17 years old. Who's going to believe her unless she actually says that the Holy Spirit is within her, and that's what the Holy Spirit says to do, is to kill people. So she gets this following through this church, and a lot of the Baptist churches in the area kind of dispelled this type of belief, but there was a lot of outpouring in the community. It was only black victims. I'm not sure why she only chose black victims, because there are white Baptists in the area, but all we have to do is look at history to figure that out. I mean, Jim Crow laws, blacks were they were held in their place by these Jim Crow laws, and she probably wouldn't have crossed the color lines at all. But she got all these believers to believe what she wants, and I think it was a sense of power too, because she had her brother and her dad and Hugh Thomas and a couple of other people that were working under her. She kind of exhibited this power of life and death over other people, and I think in the Church of the Sacrifice, actually the followers became scared of her more than anything else.
Alan,
so yes.
But what about these horrific murders they committed on children? Were they sacrificing those children?
Sacrificing the children. There was one of the things that occurred was, it's kind of a slaughter of the innocents, and these people that had that were killed allegedly had left the church when she became. She wasn't a pastor. She was more of a, like I said, a cult leader. So a lot of these people were paying for their disbelief with their lives, and that was the retribution that she had set forth as basically interpreting the Bible, and a mixture of voodoo involved with it, with the protection bags that she made for herself and the other followers that helped her commit the murder. So it had to do with slaughtering innocent blood. The sources of the time don't really go into it that deeply, but she was. I don't think she was crazy. I just think she was power hungry, and other people had to suffer because of her preaching. So it's not that confusing. It's what all cult leaders do. They exhibit this power over other people. When we look at, for instance, you were telling me you live near San Francisco, Jim Jones. How do you get these people 900 people to drink cyanide? It's a matter of power, and they have to have some sort of belief that you are a Messiah. So I think it had to do with Clementine Barnabette believing and actually exhibiting powers of a Messiah over these people, and using both a Christian faith and voodoo to do it.
Well, you sent me this picture, and I also found this on the web, a picture of a little kid's hand, a child's hand. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to read it underneath, but can you explain that picture?
Yes, one of the murdered children had wooden, I want to say not spikes, but wooden little pieces of dowels that were kind of stuck in their hands to represent the circle of the five. It was basically a calling card that the group used, because there were five murderers, including Clementine Barnabette, Hugh Thomas, and there was another one that was not identified, and Raymond Barnabette. And they used this as a warning, basically, because they were basically telling other people, this is what's going to happen to your family if you leave the church. And the child's hands, I mean, if you ever, Norene, I don't know if you've had a lot of guests on that talk about child homicides.
No.
They're very emotionally draining, especially on historians and researchers, particularly myself. And there's a child murder in the new book, BloodStained, Louisiana, that you and I discussed. It's emotionally draining. If you want the message to get across, you do it through the children. Mm-hmm. So that's why the children, that was the justification for the children to be killed, and for them to have these little pegs between their fingers. They wanted the message loud and clear. This is not a cult that you can mess with. This is not a cult that you should leave, or a belief, it's a belief system, and we feel very strongly about it. I don't think Clementine Barnabette realized just how much of a shockwave she sent through the black community, especially the black Baptist community in that area.
Now, what about, since they were into voodoo, did they drain the blood of all their victims and use it for something?
No, nothing in my research indicated that. It was just leaving the bodies the way they were and doing this to the children to send a message. They were actually identifying themselves a lot of times in serial killings like that. And again, this is before the term serial killer was actually coined. So they were just looking at it. The authorities were just looking at it as a mass killing, and the killer or killers needed to be caught. So no, it was just the act of hurting the people to bleed, not necessarily collecting the blood. Excuse me. And the research doesn't indicate, any research that I've done on the case doesn't indicate that they used any of the blood in any type. That's another thing too, Norene. There weren't any really rituals involved here, other than making the bags for protection. It was just to get to where they needed to go and murder the families that they felt had kind of turned their back on the cult, and leave it at that.
We have a viewer asking a question, but I don't understand her question. Nanny
Okay.
Tristan says, were the people she killed in San Antonio black also? Did you
Yes.
mention San Antonio? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
they were black. Now, there's been a connection. A couple of people tried to make a connection here. In 1884, I don't know if you've ever heard the servant girl murders.
No.
Well, actually, I think, yeah, those were in San Antonio. No, those were in Austin. There were 9 servant girls that were killed between 1884 and 1885. And somebody tried to make a connection that this is what happened to the family, the Wilbert Thomas family, Burton family in San Antonio. But you got to look at the times in between. And yes, they were black, but later on we discovered that they had been former members of that church. Same with the ones in Beaumont as well.
Mm.
So all the victims in this case were black.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Why she picked black? Maybe it was easier for her to pick black people than white people at that time.
Yeah, but like I said, Norene, that there's that color line. I don't think she wanted to cross that color line, and if you think on the terms of segregation, there were white churches and there were black churches. So these people actually, the authorities had theorized that they had left the church, and that this was their punishment for leaving the church. That God would only forgive them if they gave their blood in sacrifice, because it was the church of the sacrifice. So that's what the authorities had theorized at the time, that they were killed because they turned their back on the church, on the cult. I use church and cult interchangeably with this because it was a cult that came from that church of the sacrifice.
Now, Alan, you've heard about the Valeska axe murders?
Yes, I have.
The Moore family. I'm not sure about the time frame.
It was June 12th, no, June 10th of 1912.
For the Valeska?
Yeah.
And she was around.
She was around, but she was in jail, and I don't think she went that far. I have seen, I don't know if you've watched this on YouTube, there's a video called The Axeman, and it covers the Axeman of New Orleans, which we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes. But this guy who did the documentary tried to connect 79 years worth of murders to one killer. All right? And tried to connect, the Valeska murders to the Axeman, and there was some axe murders in Georgia. There was like 5 axe murders that took place in the Midwest around that time. I think those are connected, but I don't believe that the Clementine Barnabette had anything to do with that, because her victims were predominantly black. Well, they were black, and the Moore family, they were all white. Correct. In a different church, in a different faith, by the way. They were Methodists. The Moores were Methodists.
Right. Have you ever investigated on your own the facts on the Valeska murder house and come to a conclusion on that?
My conclusion actually kind of falls in line with my conclusion on the Axeman case. I mean, we know in Valeska that the killer was hiding in the attic because of the cigarette butts. We know there was a trial of a Reverend John Kelly, I believe, who was in town at that time and then left town after that. There's been some speculation, but I think the killer was there in the house. I don't think there's a connection between those and the ones in New Orleans, because I think the person in New Orleans was actually a native of the city, and I'll explain why a little bit later. But Norene, some of these cases, you're never really going to find out who the killer was. It's kind of like Jack the Ripper, of course, and the Axeman, and I know you've had a few people on about Zodiac and things of that nature. There was a killer in your area in the 1970s called the Black Doodler.
I don't.
I believe.
Hey, wait a minute. I don't know about the Black Doodler. I know about the East Bay Rapist.
I'm sorry?
We had the East Bay Rapist, but I never heard of the Black Doodler.
Oh, yeah. The Doodler killed predominantly gay men and drew pictures about it and left them at the scene.
No.
And there were one of them, one of his victims who survived was a celebrity. So they couldn't really find out who it was because the celebrity wouldn't come forward and identify who it was. Yeah, it was called the Doodler.
I never heard of it. Now, these axe murders, most of these that commit the murder, do they do this alone or do they have help?
Well, I think in the case of Clementine Barnabette, she had help, because you're going to have to subdue people when you walk in. If somebody, and while they're sleeping, you're going to have to have more than one in that particular case. In BloodStained, Louisiana, I cover 2 axe murders that occurred that I don't really want to get a lot into because I know we were talking about Axeman murders here, but there were 2 axe murders where 7 killers were involved in one and wiped out a family in Minden, Louisiana on Christmas Eve of 1916. And there was 2 men that were involved in another axe murder that took place a few years before that that took out a family of 5. I think in the story in the case of Clementine Barnabette, there had to be a group. There just had to be a group of people that were doing it because of the people that were involved. You've got a husband, a wife, 3 children. In one, the children were teenagers. I'm sure they weren't heavy sleepers. In the Axeman, you have attacks while they're asleep. So it's easier to sneak into the house and do it that way. But I also have a theory about the Axeman as well. There was a new book that came out this past year that was written by an academic. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm not really sure what she's asserting. And again, it's just a matter of, that part of everyone's brain that are interested in these facts, these cases, these true crime cases, how one person can murder another person.
When these axemen, axewomen commit these murders, do they just pick one victim of the family or do they kill the whole family?
Well, it's hard to tell. In Clementine Barnabette's case, it was the whole family. In the Axeman case, it was he attacked a couple in a particular family, but only killed maybe 1 or 2 at a time. In the Villisca axe murders, the whole family was wiped out, but there were some murders in the Midwest that occurred in 1911 and 1912 that have a signature of the same killer, and those were whole families. All right, no witnesses, Norene. You don't leave witnesses. But the Axeman of New Orleans was very mysterious. So when we talk about Clementine Barnabette, she wiped out the families that, in my opinion, left her cult, turned their backs on her. But in the Axeman, it seemed like they had something in common. The victims had something. The victimology was the same.
I now have an article that you sent me. Is the Axeman type of Jekyll, Mr. Hyde concept?
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yeah. If we want to start on the Axeman, we can start on that one. That was a newspaper article that came out that was an interview with a former detective of the New Orleans Police Department in September. I believe it was September of 1918. His name was John D'Antonio. Now, with the Axeman, what we're dealing with is The police and the population try to lump all the victims into one category. They were Italians, but not all of the victims were Italians. John D'Antonio was an experienced detective, and he made reference to Jack the Ripper in that article, stating that the killer was of the Jack the Ripper type, Jekyll and Hyde type. You know, he was meek and docile, and could be set off at any minute. Now, you know, before I talk about John D'Antonio, I'd like to get into the Axeman case, unless you have some more questions on Clementine Barnabette.
Go ahead.
Okay. The Axeman case started on May 24th, 1918. And what happened was, in the early morning hours of May 24th, 1918, about 4:30, Jake Maggio, who lived at a house that was located it was above a grocery store, it was in the back of a grocery store located on 4901 Magnolia Street in Mid-City, New Orleans. He shared the house with another brother named Andrew and his brother Joseph and Catherine, who owned the grocery store. And he starts hearing some moaning coming from the next room where Joseph and Catherine sleep. And he goes in there, and his brother, Joseph, is laying in the bed, and he's been hit over the head with a really sharp instrument. He's got gashes, deep gashes in his skull, and his wife Catherine is laying in the bed next to him. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear. Andrew, the other brother, had just been out celebrating the night before because he had been called to service of the U.S. Army. In 1918, at this time, we were in the throes of World War I. When they walked into there, they noticed that when Jacob and Andrew walk into their brother and their sister-in-law's bedroom, they notice there's blood all over the place, but there's an axe sitting in the tub. It's got blood all over it. Another thing they noticed was, I don't know if you remember these old-timey doors that have panels, short panels at the top and long panels at the bottom. Well, they noticed that one of the panels at the bottom of the door is knocked out. Now, the police, when they come to investigate, they notice that there's a strong box that's empty. So they determine that the motive is robbery. Later on, they kind of changed their story. They took Andrew in, as drunk, as hungover as he was, and questioned him because the razor that killed Catherine Maggio belonged to the other brother, Andrew. And they bring him in for questioning. Now, later on, Andrew and Jake are released because it's determined that Andrew was out at the time the couple were killed. The coroner had established the time of death around 2 a.m., 1:32 o'clock. And that the wounds were caused by external and internal hemorrhages from sharp instruments. But finding the axe with the blood all over it in the bathtub. Now, my theory about this particular killing, which I think comes into play in the later killings, is that and this is going to sound really far out, but that the killer, like in the Villisca axe murders, was already in the house. Because if you ever try to take one of these door panels off on the bottom, they are very, very difficult to do, and you need a chisel and a big hammer to do it. I think the killer was already in the house, and that when he murdered Joseph and Catherine, he was naked. He had no clothes on. All right, and because that would alleviate any type of blood on his clothing. Now, granted, this is before blood typing and DNA. Fingerprints had just come into use 7 years earlier. So if you're naked, you just go and wash off in the shower, and then you put clothes on, and then you leave later. As far as the door panel being taken out, I think it may have been kicked out before the guy left. Now, on the same day as the murders, a little bit later on, there were two detectives, Theo Obitz and Harry Dotson, and they stumbled across some chalk writing on a sidewalk near the crime scene, which is reminiscent of the Jack the Ripper killings. And the writing stated that Mrs. Maggio is going to sit up tonight just like Miss Tony. Nobody knew what the writing meant, but there were hushed tones that the mafia had something to do with the Maggio's murder, that it was some sort of vendetta. Well, later on in June of 1918, there's a baker by the name of John Zanka, and he's making his usual rounds to grocery stores. Now, the Maggios are in a grocery store. It was at an intersection of two streets, and John Zanka went to the corner of Dorgenois and La Harpe Streets. Now, I sent you a picture of what it looks like present day. But when he knocked on the door, he didn't receive any response. It was just constant knocking. And usually when he makes his rounds, he doesn't have this problem. The people that live there, a gentleman by the name of Louis Bessemer and his wife lived there. Well, Bessemer goes around to Zanka goes around to the side door and knocks on the door, and Bessemer answers the door. And when he answers the door, Zanka notices he has two deep gashes in his head. Well, Bessemer said, look, the Axeman had come to visit me and my wife's all messed up, and he did this to me. So the police are called right away. So the newspapers go nuts. Now, Norene, you got to understand the newspapers down here in New Orleans. You got to read between the lines, okay, a lot of times. And there was a lot of sensationalism with this, as there was with Jack the Ripper. Whenever there's something going on in New Orleans, we are the Big Easy down here. So the newspapers kind of took a little literary license, and they kind of pointed out that, okay, Bessemer had been attacked by the Axeman. The Maggios were killed by the Axeman, and he and his wife. Well, this is what happens. The Bessemer case is a red herring. After a little investigation, the police chief, Frank Mooney, says, hey, look, this looks like a domestic disturbance gone awry, and I'll tell you why. Bessemer wanted to investigate his own attack. And as a victim, you don't really investigate your own attack. And then police later discovered that there were letters written in German, and discovered that Bessemer was part of a spy ring in New Orleans for the Germans. And basically, I think what he was doing was he was throwing off the scent because the law was close to him. They knew what was going on. He was leading a spy ring. Because of this, Mooney demoted two detectives because these two detectives maintained that these were Axeman murders. So, can I take a breath, or
you
want me to keep going? Okay, because it's really a fascinating case. And hold on a second, can I get some water too?
Yes, sure you can. Hey, of course. Hey, you know what?
What?
I
had to teach tonight, so before
did?
the show, so I needed a little dry, but that's all right.
Alan, thanks.
We were talking about World War I. Okay, so you want me to continue? Or you got questions?
Go.
Okay. On August 5th, 1918, at approximately 1:30 a.m., Mrs. Edward Schneider was laying in her bed alone because her husband worked at night, and she had 3 little children. Now, she was pregnant, all right? She was about 8.5 months pregnant. And if she needed assistance in the middle of the night, she could call her neighbors. And they told her husband, look, if she needs our help, we know she's pregnant, we'll come over. So she's laying down, getting ready to fall asleep. And this dark figure appears over her bed and struck her in the head with a heavy object and knocked out 5 of her teeth, and she was unconscious. Well, she's worried about the baby. Well, she kind of screams, and this dark figure runs out. She survived the attack, and she later gave birth to a healthy baby girl. But this kind of dispels the mafia theory, because the mafia then did not kill or attack women or children. And the worst was yet to come, because on August 10th, which was 5 days after that attack, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, police received a phone call to an attack that occurred at the residence of a grocer by the name of Joseph Romano. Now, Mrs. Schneider ran a grocery as well, you see. So there's a thread going through all of these. There were grocers. Excuse me. And the police found a middle-aged man in his living room. He was unconscious. He had deep gashes to his head, and this was Joseph Romano. Well, he had 2 of his nieces living with him. One of them was named Pauline, who was 18, and the other one was named Mary, and they were sleeping in the next room. Well, what occurred was, during the night, Pauline was awakened, and there was a door that she looked into, that her uncle's room was in the next room, and the door was open. Well, she said that she saw a dark figure standing there in a suit and an alpine hat, which is kind of like a fedora, a short little fedora. And she screamed, and the man ran out. Well, just when the man ran out, her uncle came into her room and said, something has happened, call the charity hospital. That was the free hospital that we had until Katrina took it out. It had been around since like the 1830s. Well, Romano later died of his wounds, so now that's another victim that the Axeman had taken. Now, you mentioned that newspaper article about the Jekyll and Hyde personality, right? Right? Are you awake over there?
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. Yes, of course. And I showed that to them. I'll show it to them again.
Well, this was like John D'Antonio had, in this article, had said that the man was a Jekyll and Hyde type. He was docile, and then he could be easily excited in 1 minute to commit these murders. Well, one thing that D'Antonio mentioned in that article was that 8 years before, there was another series of murders with the exact same signature, with the exception of one. August 14th, 1910, on the night, August Crudy was a grocer, and he could not sleep because of indigestion. So he goes out into his yard, and he walks around thinking that the night air is going to be able to help him. Well, he goes back to bed, goes back to sleep, and about 3 o'clock that morning, Mrs. Crudy, who was laying next to him, wakes up and sees a dark figure standing next to the bed, and he demanded money, and she gave him everything she had. Well, she reaches over to shake her husband, and when he turns over, he's got 2 deep gashes in his head. Well, the dark figure hits him again and tries to make sure that he's dead. Fortunately and surprisingly, August Crudy actually rolled out the bed, fell on the floor, and that's what saved his life because the man ran away. And Crudy actually survived the wounds, but couldn't identify his killer. Now, on September 21st of that same year, in 1910, the same type of attack occurred to a Joseph Rossetto and his family. Again, he was a what? This is Socratic method, Norene. You got to help me.
Oh.
He was a grocer, okay, and his wounds were so severe. He'd been hit in the head that the doctors didn't think he would survive, but he did. But still, could not identify his attacker. The following year, on June 28, 1911, Mr. Joseph Davy and his wife Mary were attacked in their sleep by an unknown assailant as they slept, but Mr. Davy did not survive the attack. And Mrs. Davy said that she would go to her grave trying to find out who killed her husband.
Again, Italians.
Oh, yeah. Well, wait. It gets better. May 12th, 1912, the Anthony J. Shambra. Now, this is one that kind of deviates a little bit from the signature of this killer. Shambra suffered gunshot wounds to the sternum and the face, and his wife was wounded in the stomach and the hip. But D'Antonio attributes this to the same killer, which I never could figure out. And why these assaults were considered to be done by the same man is still a mystery. All right, now here we go again. This is 5 years later, December 22nd, 1917. Another Italian family, the Andolini family, was attacked by a small hatchet, but they survived the incident. And still no one could identify their assailant. Well, here in New Orleans, what we do down here in Louisiana is we have a sense of humor. All right, sometimes sick and distorted, but it's a sense of humor. And on August 19th of 1918, which is the year of the current ones that I was talking about, because these other killings took place in 1910, 1911, and 1917. So, in 1912 and 1917. So we have sporadic killings, but 1918 and 1990 was when we first had the series. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Like the ones that occurred in 1910, 11, 12, and 17 were sporadic killings, and 3 of them had, or attacks, and 3 of them had the same signature. But it was between 1918 and 1919 that we have the series. A local newspaper sometimes people down here embarrass me. August 19th, 1918, a local newspaper advertised that a local supermarket would be slashing prices like the Axeman.
Oh, oh no.
They tried to have a sense of humor about it, but, it's kind of morbid. Anyway, so,
was anybody, so did they have any suspects?
Well, they did have suspect, and I'll get to that near the end, because this is a guy that for 90 years, historians, what they were doing was they kept repeating the same story over and over again. And I'll tell you how I discredited the one suspect, but there was a suspect. In fact, there were two people that were arrested for it falsely, and I'm gonna get to that because there was another killing, but this time it was more brutal. On March 9th, 1919, Charles, Rose, and Mary Cortimiglia, who was 2 years old, were attacked, and the young girl, the 2-year-old, died. And Mrs. Cortimiglia blamed a neighbor by the name of Orlando Giordano and his father for the attack. Now, when I was writing about this in Italian Louisiana, I actually interviewed the nephew, the great nephew of the Giordanos. So I got to get like almost a first-hand account of what actually happened. And Mrs. Cortimiglia pointed the finger at them. Now, what happened was they were put on trial, they were found guilty and sentenced to death, but she later recanted her story. So then the Giordanos were released. So they were really the only two people that were ever arrested for the Axeman killings. And this took place on March 9th, 1919. Well, in standard serial killer fashion, on March 16th, 1919, there was a letter that was written to the Times-Picayune, which is our local newspaper, allegedly from the murderer. Mm-hmm. He stated that he was on intimate terms with the angel of death. He was from Tartarus, which is another name for hell. And he said he was very fond of jazz music. And he made the city a proposition. He said, on the 19th of March, if there is a house in New Orleans not playing jazz music around 12:15 a.m., I will visit that house and take my victims.
I remember reading
that.
Yeah.
On March 19th, there was nothing but jazz music playing throughout New Orleans because nobody wanted to visit from the Axeman. There was also a song written called Axeman's Jazz or Papa Don't Scare Me. It was, like I said, another sense of humor type of tune, and it was kind of comical. But the one thing that I question about this letter is in other serial killings, when the serial killer writes a letter to the police, they kind of mention things, facets about the crimes that they made, like something that nobody else would know. But in this letter, there wasn't that mentioned. There was just that I'm going to pass over New Orleans, and if there's jazz playing, I'm not going to visit any house. Well, that's what happened. On March 19th, 1919, there was nothing but jazz music playing, so he passed over. But in August, he waited until August 3rd. He attacked a woman by the name of Sarah Lauman, who was Jewish. She wasn't Italian, you see. So the attacks kind of backed off a little bit, and then on October 27th, 1919, the last attack of the Axeman, and this one is really important because he didn't use an axe. What he used was an iron bar and a bolt screwed into the end of it. And it was Mike Pepitone and his wife, Esther Pepitone. And she summoned the police, and then she said that my husband has been attacked by the Axeman. Now, Mike Pepitone had connections to the mafia. That's why a lot of people think the mafia was involved. Well, the murder stopped after that point. And then we have a newspaper article in 1921, 2 years after the last purported Axeman murder. It took place in Los Angeles. A lady by the name of Esther Albano shot a gentleman by the name of Joseph Monfrey, Monfre, in Los Angeles, claiming that she was protecting her family. Well, the Times-Picayune in New Orleans, you're going to love this, says that the Axeman mystery has been solved. The Axeman was murdered in Los Angeles by the wife of the last victim. Now, Esther Albano was Esther Pepitone, Mike Pepitone's wife. She moved to Los Angeles and remarried, you see?
Yeah.
And this man came into her house and was threatening her children, so she shot him. And she stood trial and was eventually released. She was found not guilty. Now, what makes this more telling in the Italian book, if you've read it, is that I know personally the nephew of Esther Albano. And I interviewed him, and he told me that she was doing what she had to do in order to protect her children. Meanwhile, you have conspiracy theorists saying, oh, well, she knew who the Axeman was all along. Now, I told you earlier that I disproved it. Now, what happened was Joseph Monfrey has been blamed for being the Axeman for 90 years. Well, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Monfrey, who fit this gentleman's description, had been in prison since 1908 and was not released until 1923. So if you go into the Angola penitentiary records and you look for this guy, he was not released until 1923. So if it wasn't Joseph Monfrey, then who was it? Again, Norene, we're left with a mystery, which is fantastic because it allows people to go on this journey, historians and amateur sleuths and whoever wants to solve the crime, to find out who the Axeman was.
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing is, I kind of like today, serial killers usually have an MO. Now, I think that Richard Rodriguez didn't. Each one of his victims, he killed his victims in different ways. But normally, a serial killer, I believe, if I'm not wrong, have an MO, and they usually follow, and that's how you're able to claim these victims with that one person. But in those days, in the early 1900s, when these axe murders were happening, they were all killed in the same manner. Did the axe murder go for the head, for a certain piece of the body? And what about the axe that was used? How do you think did they bring the axe with them? Did they have it all planned out, or was it just spontaneous?
I think it had to do, I'm not sure if it was spontaneous or not, but the axe, like I said, is a weapon of opportunity. It's back then everybody had one in their yard or in their shed or whatever. And I think he just picked it up. I mean, number one, I think he just liked killing. You know, you've got these people, serial killers, they have, what you were talking about, a signature, an MO, what they do during these things. I'm no expert, and frankly, I don't think there is an expert, because I think the criminal mind changes constantly. And so it's a weapon of opportunity. So if you want to kill somebody, what's the quickest way to do it? You hit them in the head with an axe. Now, in Villisca, the victims were not killed with the blade. They were killed with the blunt end. Their skulls were crushed. In this instance, he went for the blade. All right. I'm not sure it was. I'm not sure if it was a serial killer in the modern sense of the word. And like you said, there's no DNA. Fingerprints are barely used. I mean, and that would take a long time, because then you have to look through the cards. You have to match the fingerprints. The one thing that I think we can count on here is, yes, in some instances there was a killer, but I heard a guy by the name of Roy Hazelwood. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a retired FBI profiler. And he said that sometimes killers kill and make it look like a serial killer to hide their murder. And I think this may have been, like, for instance, we've got a few Italians, and then we've got 2 Jewish people thrown in there. I'm not so sure it was it was the Axeman that did that. I mean, if you're following a pattern, why would you deviate from the pattern? You know what I'm saying? And very seldom do they deviate from that pattern.
Okay, I want to ask you a question. All
Sure.
those people had a business, correct? The Italians
Right.
and the Jewish had. Okay, I could see where the mafia would be involved because it has to do with money. Now the thing is, would the mafia ever use an axe to do that? I mean, isn't it easier for them to just shoot them?
Shotgun.
Yeah.
Shotgun, and I'll tell you why. If you'll bear with me,
Yeah.
and the audience will bear with me for a second. Let's see. October 15th of 1890, there was an assassination of a police chief in New Orleans. His name was David Hennessy, and the mafia was blamed for it. And the murder weapon was shotguns, because they filled David Hennessy full of so much buckshot that the doctors couldn't save him. His wounds were deemed mortal. And in every case that we've seen since then, the mafia uses shotguns to fulfill vendettas. So the axe, no, I don't think. I know it's not a mafia weapon. They would have used shotguns at that time because you get more scatter and it tears people apart. And when you want to carry out a vendetta, you want to send a message to somebody. The murders weren't really, I don't think they were a message to anyone. I think he just liked killing, and perhaps maybe the killer was Italian, but he was not a member of the mafia, or he didn't like Italians. Norene, down here in Louisiana, there was a lot of racial prejudice against Italians in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Yeah.
And one of the murders that I cover in BloodStained, Louisiana, the Lamanna killing, the white communities and the Italian communities came together. So no, I don't think the mafia would have used an axe to kill, and especially kill a young child, a 2-year-old child.
No, they don't do that. No.
Yeah.
No. All right, you know what? We don't have time to do our other two cases, so you have to come back.
I have to.
You have to come back.
Okay, well, it depends on what the audience wants. If the
Of
audience wants me
course.
to come back,
Are you
I'll come
kidding
back.
me? They love you. If I love you, they love you. Right, viewers?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we have a couple of minutes for me to thank some people? Because without this person, you would have never ever known who I was. Darlene Schechtschneider was the lady that you had problems pronouncing her name, and she was the one that sent you the information about my books. And I feel blessed because God gave me a talent, and that was to educate people. And I feel blessed about that. And there's a couple of people, and I'm not going to take a lot of time. There's Jacinda and Rhonda Daigle, two inspirations in my life. Lori Dupuy is an inspiration. And Daryl Hippensteel, who helped me write Dark Bayou. I think people are going to be very, very fascinated with these books. As a history teacher, I taught in middle school, and you have to be a good storyteller or else you lose their interest. And I hope that they enjoyed the show. I'd be more than happy to come back if they want me to. And
Oh
even
my
if
God, you
want me
should
to,
see the
Norene, I love you.
viewers.
I haven't known you that long.
We got 100 people in chat. They're all saying, "Come back, come back."
Okay. I'll look. But what I want to do is, you and your husband are coming down here to New Orleans in March, right?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send you some beads, and I'm gonna send you some doubloons, and then when you come down here, you can wear them, and maybe we can meet and have coffee or something. I'll take you down to the Cafe du Monde and have some coffee and donuts.
I've had those. This will be our third trip.
Okay.
To New Orleans.
Okay. Well, then I'm not going to send you any beads.
Oh, yeah. We love New Orleans. Love it. And we can't wait to come back. But, to our viewers tonight, we had two other cases we were going to talk about. But Alan's going to come back, and I'm going to do some more shows with Alan because I love true crime. And I know you all love true crime as well. I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to get answered before we go. Let's see. Okay, Miller. Oh, wait a minute. I think you talked about this. What is your opinion on the Lizzie Borden case?
Lizzie Borden case, I think Lizzie did it.
Okay.
I do. And again, she was naked. I mean, there was a movie in the 1970s with Elizabeth Montgomery where she played Lizzie Borden, and she committed the murders naked. And that would be a great way, but back then there's no blood. I think she did it. I think there was some, and I hope I don't scare any viewers off with this, but I think there was some incest involved between Andrew Borden and the daughters, and I think that maybe Lizzie saw that, well, if I kill my father, I get rid of the incest, and I get his fortune, which was a great deal of money back then.
Oh yeah, I had read that before about that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? One more question we can do. It's P.I.M. Bragoglia. Are there any descendants of any victims surviving members of the Axe murders, and have you had any success in locating them for info they may have regarding the ancestors' demise?
The only people that I actually I know, in fact, I know a Shambra that I'm really good friends with. Her name is Kat Shambra, and her husband John. Kat Shambra, she was married. John's got a different name, but anyway, in Louisiana, especially that far back, that'd be an interesting project to do. No, I did not interview any of the survivors, but I did interview descendants of people that were involved in the crimes, that were allegedly involved in the crimes themselves. If it's a survivor, yes, I did interview Esther Albano's nephew, Mr. Angelo Spinato, and I'm going to tell it now because he's a great guy. He's 94 years old, and he told me something one time, Norene, and I hope this is true. He says, once you make a friend of an Italian, you have a friend for life.
Yeah.
And I hope that's true with you and I, because I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This is incredible.
We love you, Alan. Like I said, myself and my viewers, we love true crime. We love it.
It would be my pleasure.
Yeah, we would love to have you come back. They all want you to come back, and we will.
Okay.
Next year, I'm only limited. I'm only doing one more show. I'm only doing one more show this year. It'll one show left in December. I'll schedule you for next year. Okay, that's a deal.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get in the way of your trip down here. I mean, if you want to do something live with me, just a brief little say hello to your to your fan base and a lot of my friends when you're down here. We can do that. I mean, that's not a problem. But yeah, I'd love to, Norene. I'd love to. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. I'd like them to go out and buy the book. BloodStained Louisiana and Dark Bayou. Here, I have a copy of Dark Bayou right here. Okay.
Hold on.
I have a copy of BloodStained Louisiana.
All right, wait a minute. Do that again, because I was showing the images that I had posted. So go ahead, show them your books.
Here's Dark Bayou, right here. Okay, and here is BloodStained Louisiana, and I wanted to mention that it's all over the place. They're all over the place. Great publisher, and the audio books will be prepared hopefully this year, because they're going to let me do them. My father was a radio announcer, and he taught us how to elocute well. And people say I have a good radio voice, so the publisher said, okay, go ahead and do the audio book. So, you can contact me through Facebook if you want to be my buddy, my friend. I don't have a lot of friends, but I really enjoyed it. But yes, Norene, anytime you want to schedule me to come back, I'll probably have another book out by next year. So.
Oh wow! Oh, and it's all on mostly Louisiana, isn't it?
Yes, but I'm kind of branching out a little bit. The next book is called Darkest Dixie, and it has to do with infamous murders in the Deep South, which encompass Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida.
Awesome, Alan. Do you ever write on unsolved murders?
Well, I tell you the truth, Norene, that's a little above my pay grade. I was a legal investigator for a while, but I was mostly, minor criminal and kind of personal injury lawsuits. So I'm kind of limited with that. But I do have a good friend of mine. His name's Sal Perricone. He is a former FBI agent, and federal prosecutor that has asked me, well, we have talked to it between each other that we were going to write a book together, and it might be on an unsolved mystery, because we had a serial killer here in Louisiana, in New Orleans, that killed over 24 young women and young men in the 1990s. So I'm thinking about maybe that might be my next project. But I'd like to lend my talents to do that. I mean, I'm not an expert on anything. I find I'm learning a lot. Hey, let me ask you a question. Did Jeff Mudgett sign into the room?
No.
He did?
No.
Okay.
No.
I was waiting for him to ask me a question. That's all right.
No, he's so involved with his project, and you know, with H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper. He's really involved with that. So
yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, Alan, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show. It was so much fun, and I love hearing all of this, and the viewers did too. And like I said, they all want you to come back, and Alan said he'll come back, so we'll see him next year. And Alan, thank you so much. Hope maybe I'll see you in Louisiana or New Orleans when we go there.
All right, Norene.
And stay, I love you, honey, and stay in touch with me, okay?
I will.
Thank you.
I will.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Oh, awesome. Isn't he awesome? I love him. Thank you, Darlene. Thank you so much for connecting us. Okay, let me do some fast shout outs. I've got a last show, the 30th with Vanessa Hogel. We're going to do, I have a couple of things in mind, but I think we're going to do unsolved murders again. I love doing those. And, oh my God. And then let's see, I have one last show scheduled December 14th, and if you sign up, you'll get the information on it. You can go to paranormalzone.tv, click on show reminders, and then you can get show reminders as well. I'll do some fast shout outs. Oh my God, I have to tell you, my first show for January, let me find this. Oh my God, I almost died. This guy sent me a message asking to be on the show, and it's called The Man Who Sent the SOS, a memoir of reincarnation and the Titanic. He had a past life regression, and he was on the Titanic, and he's got, oh my God, what a story he has to tell about him being on the Titanic through his past life regression. Is absolutely fabulous. When he sent the message and I checked out his website, I sent him back immediately. I scheduled him for a show. I can't wait. He talks about his bone-chilling experience on the Titanic, so I can't wait. Okay, so let's do shout-outs. Okay, Royce sent me a message. Okay, oh, thanks, Royce. Also, if I have another message from Royce. Oh, I want to thank everybody, thank our mods, Royce Hinman and Annie, Unique Annie. Without them, you guys would not have the chat room that we have, and I appreciate them so much. Thank you. Thank the mods, please. Okay, so, oh God, I have a message from Royce, and I can't find it, Royce. Somebody needs our prayers. Oh, Jen Hay, everyone can get prayers for my family. See, my dad has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So everybody, would you please pray for Jen Hay and her family? That would be appreciated. All right, so let's do some shout outs. Royce, Aether Shadow, Andrew Cox, Chipeteri, Darlene Schutzenader, David Marlon Alvarez, Gookie Star, Janice Balt, Joanne D, Leonora Martinez, Lepardista, I'm terrible, Lee Pardista, Miller, Misty Dawn, Nanny Tristan, Punji Fungi, Royce Hinman, Unique Annie, Texas Nancy, Wade Worthington, and Zippy Davis, And a shout out to Anthony, who used to be at 2. Also, I know Carl White is watching. He always comes in late, but I know you're out there, Carl. Thank you. So everybody, thanks so much for being here tonight. Sandra, anybody else I missed? Did I miss anybody else? I think Royce sent me everybody that's left. We had a nice crowd tonight. I want to thank you so much. Thank you, Unique Annie. I love my mods, Royce and Unique Annie. My God, they are so wonderful to come in every week and help out. So with that, there you are, Carl. I knew you'd be there. 3:13 in the morning. Diane Hilbert. Oh, Ginger Simmons. Hi, honey. Bethany Warner. Anybody else? All right. So see you in after Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, huh? I'm cooking. We got a small crowd this year, only 10 people, but Christmas is going to be huge. 25 at my daughter's house. So everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And wait a minute, I missed one. David Marlon Alvarez. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will see you on the 30th, huh? Don't forget. Also, please don't forget to subscribe and give the show a like. I'd appreciate it. I only have 60 thumbs up, and there was almost 100 people here. YouTube Live 1000, Freedom Miss 617, Carl White, The Curse Arthur. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to go. My husband's waiting for me. We're going to have dinner, watch the end of the Warriors game, and then there's a doubleheader tonight in basketball. I love basketball. Everybody, I love you, and thank you, Group Hub. Hug to everybody, and thank you so much for coming to my show each time. I really appreciate it. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.